When your car brand needs a shot in the arm, it's always a good idea to make a sports car. If you get it right, there's a bit of instant excitement, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't sell that well because the rest of your range gets the bump it needs to keep you profitable. Fiat made decent little cars in the 1980s, but with cheap Japanese imports and German competition nipping at their heels, the company planned not one, but two sports cars to get them noticed. And so, in 1995, the Fiat Barchetta was born. How did the Barchetta stack up against its major competitor, the MX-5? Why didn't it make it to North America? And was it popular? So, from its creator, Andreas Zapatinas, and myself, welcome to the Fiat Barchetta story. Fiat were already working on a new sports car, the Fiat Coupe, but the launch of the Mazda MX-5 in 1989 was a bombshell for the entire car industry. Mazda had managed to create a modern car that captured the excitement of 1960s lightweight roadsters like the MG, Triumph TR, and of course the Fiat 124 Sport Spider.
The 124 Spider was long, dead by then. And there was nothing else. Let's not forget, in the 60s and early 70s, in Italy, there were all sorts of Spiders, Alfa Romeos, Fiats, you name it, Lancias, it was really a lovely period. So there was an opportunity to take care of immediately.
The coupe was based on the larger Fiat Tipo platform and was too large to compete with the MX-5. Fiat had a new CEO who wanted to make his mark. If Mazda were taking the world by storm with their new car and hoovering up lots of money in the process, then surely Fiat could do the same thing. Now, where Mazda had created their own dedicated lightweight platform, Fiat was fortunate in that they already had a range of small lightweight platforms for its small cars with good handling, but changes were needed to allow them to work for a roadster.
Well, throughout the project, the only platform that was presented to me to work upon was the Punto platform. The car was already developed, it was not finished. So I had to work from that. And that was not easy, as you can understand, because the Punto was basically almost like a small monovolume vehicle.
Although there was significant potential to profit from a roadster in North America, the Punto platform wasn't originally built for this market. Modifications would be necessary to meet US safety standards, and Fiat, having exited the region just 8 years earlier, wasn't in any rush to make a return. The Punto platform set certain parameters such as the powertrain and suspension. It also set up the limits of the shape that could be produced. But at least the Punto was still being developed. It hadn't been released yet, so there were certain changes that could be made to the platform to get the correct proportions. The Punto might be short, but Fiat needed to reduce the wheelbase by another 17 centimeters or about 7 inches to make a car that would be roughly the same size as the MX-5.
There was quite a bit interesting moments of hot moments sometimes between, let's say, the people who had the Punto platform that we had to actually modify in some key areas in order to come back, to bring back the windshield and lower also the windshield by almost 12 centimeters. The engine, you have a transverse engine, which is sticking out. The wheels of the car are quite small. So you had to really fight for that. So even working on the wheel size, even to gain 5 millimeters, I remember, I made a big fight, personal fight, to try to gain, I think, 5 millimeters or overall diameter by putting a 55 section instead of a 50 section on the tires, by allowing that the car would have written on the owner manual that you cannot put a certain kind of chains on the car.
Like the BMW Z1, the windscreen not only had to hold its own weight now that there wasn't a roof, but it had to hold up in a rollover to save your life, so the A-pillars were reinforced, which also helped with the torsional stiffness of the car. Andreas produced initial sketches of the car he hoped that Fiat would produce, and there was only one car that gave him inspiration, something that was a bit of a surprise for an Italian roadster.
For me, the inspiration was the MGA. Unfortunately, I didn't have that hood, but if you see, there's this long front fender and there's this short rear fender. And somehow the stance of the MGA, I always liked the car.
The MGA's cockpit was also an inspiration, the way it wrapped around the passenger and the driver. But this wasn't the only proposal. 3 of them were created with very different and very Italian code names.
We used to name the proposals according to the designers at the studio. So it would be, the Andreas proposal, the Chris's proposal, or whatever, Mike's proposal, whatever. But unfortunately, for this project, 2 proposals were mine. So I said, all right, we will call them, we'll find names. There was the Diavola, there was the Marinara, and there was the Atomica. Okay. They were pizza names.
There was a 4th proposal as well, dubbed Bismarck, another pizza name, but this didn't make it to the scale model stage. Only 2 made it to full-size clays, Andreas's Mariana design, the one that had been inspired by the MGA, and the Diavola or Devil that had the look of a larger Fiat Coupe. You can tell Fiat had the MX-5 and the Lotus Elan in their sights, as both cars can be seen in the background. The team also worked on different dashboard designs in parallel. If Fiat had followed its head, it might have gone for the Diavola. It had the look of the new Fiat Coupe, so it would have created a family look. It was a sensible decision, but Fiat was Italian and they had to follow their heart. The new small sports car to take on the MX-5 would be the Mariana. The rest of 1991 was spent tweaking the design, including the front lights and separate rear light design, a style that set the car apart from the run-of-the-mill. By early 1992, the dashboard was coming along as well, a simple design that focused on driver enjoyment. The interior was coming along well, but of course at some point it's going to rain and you need something on the top of the car to make sure everything doesn't get wet, so of course thoughts eventually turned to making a soft top. The initial idea for the soft top cover was to use it as a rear spoiler, but that idea was dropped. The final solution was a clean and simple design that neatly folded away like the MX-5. And like the MX-5, there was an option of a hard top that could be left at home when the sun came out. While tweaking the design, the team made sure to focus on the everyday things that made a classic sports car.
I didn't want a molding on the door, on the top of the door. Because, if you have a sunny day in the summer and you put your arm in that molding, the sizzling molding, you're going to feel it, okay? So there was a special effort made to have the shape of the door in that area communicate, go all the way inside on the inside part of the car uninterrupted. So you have a little rubber, so you can lay your arm very comfortably and just kind of embrace the car as you drive, which I think it's kind of the interesting experience of driving a sports car. Also, we didn't want to have the little window on the side, the triangle. To me, that's not a roadster. I didn't particularly like when some so-called roadsters had a big window that arrived all the way up to here. Sorry, folks, that's not a roadster for me. I got to put my arm there and I have to be as close as possible to the open air.
The attention to detail also extended to the door handles.
Why we tried a lot of door handles? Because if you see where the door handle is positioned, is exactly where it's one of the most sensual parts of the body. It's where the rear fender comes with the front fender, they're intersecting. And honestly, how can you put a big door handle there? Usually the door handles are the same left and right. This one, because there's a slight curvature in it, they are not symmetrical, they're individual.
Being based on the Punto, the front end needed special treatment.
Not just everybody had a smile those days in the cars, everybody smiled. That was the first graphic that had this. And this was that was the first car that had this graphic. And this graphic is used a lot since then. The inspiration actually from the graphic came from the Tyrrell. It was the first Formula One car that had the nose, the front of it higher, and the 2 spoilers going down like that. So you had this graphic like this. And that Tyrrell had come out at that time. So the other problem I had with the Barchetta was because it was original Punto, the front of the car was very thick and relatively narrow. But by doing this line like that, you kind of unloaded the lower part of the car towards the ground. And the car looked much more sharp instead of looking like a big wall in the front. And when it came out, I remember in Geneva, that was 3-4 years later, a lot of people didn't like that graphic. They say, "Ah, no, that's very strange because it's kind of like that." They say it looks like a catfish, is not bad. But go around and you see how many people use that graphic after that. But for the same reasons, because it basically lightened up the front. I was always surprised why on the restyling they did, which I didn't participate, they put the vertical grille. To me, that was a big mistake because it actually made the front look even heavier.
The car's design was almost complete, so thoughts of course turned to manufacturing. Fiat's new sports car also brought back old car-making skills for a mass-produced car.
Both the hood and the trunk are islands, which means you do brazing and welding, hand welding and hand brazing for the front headlights and the rear taillights as well. That was kind of a renaissance at that time, coming back to traditional Italian coach building, which required a lot of handwork. That was not easy to do. It was very labor intensive. And probably I think the Barchetta and the Coupe, the Fiat Coupe had a lot of that in the rear, for the rear taillights.
Fiat's new sports car was one of a long line of lightweight Italian sports cars. Some of the early cars, such as the Ferrari 166mm, had been built from wood, so were given the name Barchetta, or Little Boat. The name seemed appropriate for Fiat's new Roadster, so it was named the Fiat Barchetta. To test the public's reaction to the new Fiat Roadster, Fiat showed off the Sia concept at the Turin Motor Show in 1993, crafted by John Kinsley and Darren Cadders. It really lent into the boat theme and accentuated its punto roots with a small bonnet and extended rear. The public might not get a sneak peek of the Barchetta in 1993, but they got the next best thing. The Fiat Punto that the Barchetta was based on launched that year, and like the Barchetta, it would eventually appear as a soft top. The Barchetta's big sister also launched the same year, the Fiat Coupe, or Coupe Fiat as it was sometimes confusingly called. The Fiat Barchetta launched in 1995, a new exciting roadster with all the sensual lines you'd expect from Fiat. The marketing materials of course didn't cite the MGA as an influence, but those classic Fiat roadsters. There was space for two and a good amount of luggage. The level of trim was impressive: power steering, electric windows, a driver's airbag plus the option of a passenger airbag, electric mirrors, ABS and leather seats. The interior used parts from the Punto such as the switches, the gear stick, and it looks like the heating controls were largely the same. The steering wheel came from the Fiat Coupe, but there was a lot that was new, and with the round vents it had more than a passing resemblance to the MX-5's interior. There was one major omission with the interior though: it didn't have any carpets. Fiat offered only one engine, a 16-valve 129 horsepower version of their new 1.8 litre that would also appear on the Fiat Coupe. It delivered almost identical performance to the MX-5's most powerful engine, and of course it only came with a manual gear stick. But as the MX-5 had showed, it wasn't the power that mattered in a car like this, it was handling, and this is where the Barchetta suffered from its Punto origins. It had the engine up front like the MX-5, but unlike the MX-5, it was front-wheel drive. Fiat improved the Barchetta's Punto suspension with an anti-roll bar, and reviewers liked how the Barchetta drove, but they preferred the MX-5. At least the price was reasonable. It launched in Italy for 33.8 million lira. That sounds like a lot, but it put it about 10% less than an entry-level MX-5 that had a less powerful engine. Over in the UK, Fiat were also happy to sell you a Barchetta. They weren't so happy to accommodate your strange insistence of putting the steering wheel on the right side of the car. That would have cost Fiat an additional £7.6 million, so although you'd be able to enjoy a good twisty A-road, good luck trying to see ahead of that tractor you'd inevitably need to overtake. And then there was the British weather, where endless Italian summers provided ample open-top fun. In Britain, there were about 3 days in July when it was just about warm enough to put the top down. But the biggest problem was the launch of the new MG-F, a mid-engined roadster that was a lot of fun to drive and had the common decency to put the steering wheel on the correct side of the car. Unsurprisingly, sales of the Barchetta weren't brisk in the UK and it soon disappeared from British showrooms. The Barchetta wasn't manufactured by Fiat, but by coach builder Maggiora, who thought to increase business by proposing two new versions of the Barchetta. The first was a coupe, the second was the Trofeo or Trophy, a car designed for a 1 Series sports car championship that would hopefully increase Barchetta sales and of course sales of Fiat's whole range. Both cars never made it to production though. Fiat already had a coupe, the aptly named Fiat Coupe, and presumably they didn't see the economics of the Trofeo championship working out. Another proposal was the Dedica or Dedication from concept car company Stoller that knew one or two things about the Barchetta. They'd worked with Fiat on the original concept. The Dedica was a stripped back Barchetta that looked back to Fiat in the 1950s. There was little to no windscreen to speak of to aid aerodynamics, and the car got the larger 2-litre 262 horsepower engine from the Fiat Coupe, delivering a 0 to 60 time under 6 seconds. Unfortunately, this was just a one-off concept and wasn't taken any further. Other than a 1999 engine tweak to help European regulations, not much was done to update the Barchetta. There wasn't much money as sales weren't that great. The larger Fiat Coupe ended production in 2000 and it had sold better than the Barchetta. There was an idea of fitting a smaller 1.2 litre 85 horsepower engine for countries such as Greece or Romania, but nothing came of it. The Barchetta remained just with the single engine. Things went from bad to worse. The company making the car, Maggiora, went bankrupt and that halted production. Fiat were forced to relocate the production line to one of their own factories, but it took around a year until there were new Barchettas ready to sell. When production finally resumed, it was with an updated car styled by Tom Chada. This must have been a bit of a quick fill-in job for him, because this is the person who'd styled exotics like the Ferrari 365 California, De Tomaso Pantera, and the first generation Ford Fiesta. He gave the Barchetta a third tail light, there was better side impact protection, along with a revised front spoiler that, as you heard earlier, Andreas Zapatinas wasn't a fan of. By this stage, he'd moved away from Fiat, first to BMW, he then became Alfa Romeo's chief designer, and by 2002, he was head of advanced design at Subaru. Production halted once again in 2004, presumably due to a lack of demand. It resumed once again, but by 2005 it was clear it was the end of the road. Production ended for good, with just over 57,000 cars produced over a 10-year period. There wouldn't be an immediate replacement, but there was hope one might eventually appear when a new Barchetta concept appeared in 2007. It was styled by Bertone to celebrate their 95th anniversary, this time based on the Fiat Panda platform. It was designed to evoke the Fiat 500 with Barchetta bodywork from 1947 that Nuccio Bertone created as a one-off to go racing. It was a car, we were assured, that was completely above fashion. In fact, if anything, it made its own fashion statement. I've always thought I had no clue about fashion, but now it's clear to me that I've been above fashion. Although rather than doing it with scissor doors like this car, I've been doing it with socks and sandals. The Barchetta, unlike my dress sense, might be beautiful, but it didn't go into production. And so Fiat returned to a life of regular passenger cars. Like many car companies, they tried to best the MX-5, but the MX-5 reigned supreme. Car companies are frenemies though. A competitor one day can turn into a collaborator if there's a need. So when Mazda needed help making the finances work for a 4th generation MX-5, they found a willing partner in Fiat, who sold a slightly different version as the Fiat 124 Spider, a reskinned MX-5 with a Fiat powertrain. Finally, Fiat had a rear-wheel drive roadster, but it still had a hard time besting the well-known MX-5, and production lasted for only 5 years. The Barchetta wasn't a bad idea. Take an existing small car platform which is nippy and handles well and turn it into a roadster. Triumph took a lot from the Herald when they created the Spitfire, and Rover took the good bits from the Metro to make the MG-F. The problem was the MX-5, a roadster that was designed from the ground up by people who wanted to build the roadster they misremembered from their youth. It was and is a terrific car, and not one that could be beaten by something that started out as a front-wheel drive Fiat Punto. Fiat should have realised this and either done what Rover did and made significant changes, or cut their losses once it was clear that it wouldn't work. If the MX-5 or the MG-F hadn't been around, the Fiat Barchetta would surely have been the cheap, fun little roadster that would have been seen all over Europe. Many thanks to Andreas Zapatinas for sharing his memories of this wonderful car. If you want to see the full interview or a history of the MX-5, there are links to both of those videos on the right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.